Are atheists angry? If you listen to the religious, they say we are, but that's not how it actually works. We're not mad at any gods because we don't believe any gods exist. If we're mad, it's because of the idiots who believe in gods, and those people tend to do some pretty stupid things, and we're just responding as we should. The religious, they can never get that through their heads, though. So let's go look at an example. We haven't done a Brian Holdsworth video for a while, so why the heck not? Granted, the more time goes by, the less impressed I am with anyone remotely Catholic, because it's painfully obvious just how empty and self-serving their theology is. But, you know, I'm a glutton for punishment, so here we go again. This time, he wants to know why atheists are angry at God. We're not. We don't believe God exists. Obviously, Brian isn't very clear on this concept, is he? And that's not exactly a huge surprise. So, what the heck? Let's go get to it.
I recently saw a clip of an exchange between a street evangelist and a crowd of people that he was trying to evangelize. And at one point, an older man introduced his own contribution to the exchange by offering his own version of the problem of pain argument against the existence of God.
Well, that's not really it, is it? It's not the problem of pain, it's the problem of evil, and that was Cliff Connectal, not anybody with a brain. Now, I don't think I've ever seen that particular video, at least the quick subtitles didn't sound all that familiar, although I've seen similar things many times before. The problem here is that Brian Holdsworth doesn't have a clue. He's going to claim that atheists are mad at God. We're not. The guy in the clip, I'm assuming, because I wasn't there and I don't think I've ever seen that clip, but I think the guy in the clip was mad at Cliff Connectal. We're tired of people being lied to by the religious con men, which is what happens all the time. We're not mad at Christ. We're mad at Christians. We don't believe Christ exists. You people, however, unfortunately do. And it would be really, really helpful if you'd all just go the hell away.
And his remark was something like, how can God allow 6 million Jews to get murdered during the Holocaust? How can he sit by and do nothing when innocent children are abused in horrific ways or die of terrible diseases?
And that is a fair question. He was asking for Cliff's perspective. He probably doesn't believe that God is real, and I can't speak for him because I'm not him, but that's what I take out of it. It's just a story that Cliff, in this instance, is telling, and he is demanding justification. That's fair. It's completely fair. I can't debate your imaginary friend because I don't believe your imaginary friend is real. But I can sure go after the idiot over there telling nonsensical stories as if they were demonstrably true. I'm just asking for your demonstration. Cliff is playing PR for his imaginary friend, and I think it's perfectly valid to throw some difficult questions at him about crap in the Bible that Cliff apparently believes, just to see how he can rationalize his way around it. It's not like he has evidence or anything. These are just fairy tales, but Cliff can't even do a credible job at that. And that's why Cliff is such a moron. He's a complete laughingstock. I don't think there's a whole lot of value in doing his videos, but people seem to like it, so they do pop up every now and then.
And before the evangelist was able to respond, because this was supposed to be an interactive format, the man with the objection turned his back and walked away, refusing to listen to whatever answer might come.
Do you honestly think these people haven't heard it all before? We know everything that you idiots are going to say because you won't shut the hell up about it. I could stop making videos today and still predict everything that the religious are going to say, because their tall tales never change. Cliff is going to say the same thing in general that Frank Turek does, or that William Lane Craig does, or that Brian Holdsworth would say. These people are stuck in an endless loop where they don't care at all about actual reality. They're just repeating their theology verbatim because that's what they really want to believe. And no, Cliff isn't holding an interactive discussion forum. He's picking and choosing what he wants to respond to, whatever he can pull out of his big bag of scripts, because he has nothing original to say on his own. Whoever that guy was, and I have no clue, but whoever he was, I'm sure he's heard it all before too. He's just letting the rest of the crowd hear just how stupid Cliff sounds for themselves. And I guess there is some value in that, but not a whole lot.
And it was clear that he was angry. He was gesturing aggressively, raising his voice, and in the end, he was too angry to wait for any kind of a response.
And you interpret that as anger against God instead of the actual answer, anger towards Christians, anger towards Christianity. It's not the gods that are the problem, since there's no evidence that there are any gods in the first place. It's the idiots who believe in the gods that are. That's where all of these people go wrong. They assume that they're just out there doing the Lord's work, and they're not. They're just making fools of themselves and hurting other actual human beings with their nonsense. Oh, and they're trying to make a buck while they're at it, because that's really what this is all about. It's the apologists who don't actually understand anything. They think we're mad at their imaginary friends. We're not. We're mad at you for being complete assholes. Maybe you ought to just knock that off.
And I don't think, and this is based on my own experience, which is quite extensive, that this kind of thing is exceptional. That conversations about the existence of God can evoke this kind of emotional response.
That's because you don't engage in debates about the existence of God. Not ever. You simply assume it and insist that it just has to be true. If you've ever seen any debate on does God exist, you'll notice that the theist never addresses the question. Not at all. They just assume that their faith is true, and that's the end of it. An actual debate requires the presentation of evidence and argumentation supporting your claim. And the religious never do that. They start and end with faith and expect others to prove them wrong, and then they just reject anything the other side has to say out of hand because they can't be wrong. And that is not a debate. That's just a complete waste of time, but that's what talking to the religious is really all about, isn't it?
Which is strange when you really think about it, right? Like, imagine if two pundits were debating who they thought should be, I don't know, like the rookie of the year in Major League Baseball.
I just think it's funny that he couldn't find a video clip about baseball. He has to use one about soccer, or football for people not in the US. Why couldn't he have just changed his analogy to soccer in this case? Because Brian Holdsworth is just not that bright. But if you're going to have a discussion about baseball players, just to keep with his analogy, then at least you have to be able to show that the players you're talking about actually exist. They have to have demonstrable records that you can compare and contrast to see which ones are actually the best. No, what Brian here is talking about is pure fiction. It's like debating the record of Sid Finch, and for anybody not aware, Sid Finch was a parody written as an April Fool's Day hoax by George Plimpton back in 1985 in an issue of Sports Illustrated. He talked about Finch as if he were real, claiming he could throw a baseball at 168 miles an hour, and it fooled a lot of people. You know, kind of like apologists and God. So I guess his screw-up bore worthwhile fruit after all. He just proved just how stupid religion and the religious are. No surprise there.
And without really listening to the other person, one of them just spent most of his time and effort personally ridiculing and denouncing the other person, and then eventually just stormed away without listening to any kind of a response.
If they're not saying anything worthwhile, then why remain? I mean, that's an honest question. I walk away from plenty of religious discussions when it becomes painfully obvious that the religious have absolutely no clue about reality, and they don't care. They're just spouting all the crap that they take on faith as if it is demonstrable fact, when they have no demonstrable facts whatsoever. They are not interested in any way whatsoever in discovering actual truth. Why? Because they think they've already got it. Because they really like the stuff they already believe. But that doesn't make any of it true, and that's the problem. It's why a ton of discussions in the comments with the religious fail. They say something, I challenge their claim, they ignore the challenge and just say that thing over and over again. I produce evidence that they're wrong. They ignore the evidence and restate the original claim verbatim. They don't care about the truth. They just really want to believe. And I'm sorry, but I've got better things to do than waste my time on that.
If you were a witness to that kind of interaction, wouldn't you likely conclude that the enraged pundit was informed more by some personal resentment than reason and logic?
Nope. You are just assuming that there's anything reasonable or logical going on. I guess it's been a while by the time this video comes out, but Matt Dillahunty walked away from a debate with a theist who wasn't there to actually debate. They were just there to preach and make unsupported claims. They stated their beliefs confidently and refused to even acknowledge any of the challenges that Matt presented. So Matt got tired of it and got up and left. I mean, there was no point to remaining. There was no reason or logic going on at all, and the religious, they don't think that's a problem. It is, but they don't think so because they think they've already got the truth. Now, I'm not saying that I would or wouldn't have done the same thing given a similar situation, because I don't do those stupid stage debates at all, but I've got better things to do with my time than listen to a religious blowhard talk about all the shit they take on faith and ignore everything that anybody has a problem with. In fact, I was watching a video on Atheist Experience earlier today, got about halfway through it, and it became painfully obvious that the theist didn't give a damn what anybody said to them. They were just looking for a way to get to God. And I turned it off because I got no interest in that. Seriously, if you can't come up with something intelligent to say, backed up by evidence and reason, then screw you. I got nothing to say to you. If you've got none of the stuff that needs to be said in an intelligent debate, I'm out. I mean, you're not listening to me anyhow, so what the hell's the point?
And what I find with a significant sample size of atheists, which I've been exposed to in this kind of work,
I don't believe that for a second. This is pure interpretation, not reality. How many of those atheists, and I'm just kind of spitballing here because I've got no idea what he might say next, but how many atheists who walked away from a conversation with Brian Holdsworth, if that ever happened, because these people tend to just make up stories that are convenient for their current talk, how many of those people do you think he ran after and asked why they were leaving? Any? I doubt it. No, he just stapled his own interpretation onto it instead of finding out why from the horse's mouth. Now, maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't know. Maybe he has records of a comprehensive exit interview with every single atheist he's ever interacted with, but I don't really think that's true. I think this is just shit he wants to believe. After all, that's all they do. Believe. And that belief is shit. It's just not impressive.
is that they don't just disagree with certain doctrines of religion like Christianity, they hate it.
No. And here's something else. I don't care about your doctrines. Your doctrines are entirely worthless until you can prove that the base assumption that you make, in this case that your God is real, can be evidentially defended. That's why I don't do an awful lot of doctrinal videos. I mean, there's a few here and there, mostly just looking at the unjustified assumptions that the religious make, but mostly I don't give a damn about your doctrines. I care about your objective support for your core beliefs, and they don't have any of that, do they? It's why More and more often these days, discussions break down right after it becomes painfully obvious that they can't defend their God beliefs. If that piece falls, everything else behind it falls too. Nothing else matters if you can't defend that most central core concept, and none of them can. Your stupid book doesn't matter. The history of your church doesn't matter. And since he's Catholic, his church is about all he actually cares about. The stuff that the Pope says, well, that's just gotta be true. It's why doing Casey Cole videos is such a complete waste of time. Casey is just an apologist for Catholicism. He doesn't care if any of it is true at all. His beliefs do not have a rational basis in fact. He just really likes his church, and that doesn't mean anything that the church says actually represents objective reality. So let's be honest here, fuck Catholicism. I am not remotely impressed.
In an unambiguous way, the lack of ambiguity is demonstrated by the consistent habit of relying on condescension, ridicule, and what Chesterton called the sneer.
See, this is what the religious do. They are so personally impressed with their own religious beliefs and so insistent that they are the victims in any exchange that they are looking for people to hate them. They expect everyone to have a hate boner for their theology, which is how they are so self-assured that they're right. Their stupid book tells them this is going to happen. So they go out looking for that kind of thing, confirmation bias and all that, and when they don't find it, they just interpret what they do find as personal attacks against themselves and their beliefs, and that's just ludicrous. They're just trying to see what they want to see, because it's an internal justification for the validity of their faith. And it's too bad it doesn't actually mean any of that, right?
They don't just disagree, they consider the thing to be contemptible. And that hatred can compel a person to refuse any possible evidence that might be presented to them, with more than a few leading atheists having admitted this kind of a prejudice.
And these are the lies that they tell themselves because I think they know on some level that they've got nothing. The religious are full of excuses and bald rationalizations for why they fail all the time. We tell you exactly what it's going to take to convince us, but they have none of that, so they just invent sob stories for why it's so unfair that we won't accept their blind faith and wishful thinking as proof for their imaginary friends. It convinced them after all, right? Except it didn't. I have never run into a single theist that has ever been converted to their religion based solely on the arguments and claims of the religion. It's always faith and fee-fees. We can go back to Francis Collins, former head of the Human Genome Project, and his conversion story where he went into the woods and found a waterfall frozen in 3 parts, and suddenly he believed. Yes, it is a lot more complex than that, but when he talks about it publicly, that's the story he tells. It's a miracle. No, you're just delusional. I'm waiting for the theist who converts to a religion, any religion, because I'm not really that picky here, for entirely rational reasons, without faith or fifis being involved at all. Where are those people? Because I don't think they exist. As far as I'm concerned, if you're using faith or emotion to justify your views about reality, you're doing intelligence wrong. The real world exists beyond your head. If you can't stay out of your own head and your own emotional state to learn about actual reality, then you've got something severely wrong with you. This is just Brian making more excuses, and I am not remotely impressed with any of it. Are you?
Because what kind of a person trying to position themselves as rational would open a debate by admitting that they are unwilling to consider any possible evidence that could be presented for the existence of God?
I don't know who you're talking to, but your side demonstrably does this all the time. Ken Ham says there is absolutely nothing that would ever make him change his mind about God. So does William Lane Craig. There is no conceivable way for him to deconvert, and he says so, because he's got the witness of the Holy Spirit. Now, I can't speak for anyone else, and I don't care about other people's opinions necessarily. I only care about the facts. If you had evidence that was convincing enough to a rational skeptic that your imaginary friend in the sky was actually real, I would accept that as true. The problem is, you don't. This is just deflection. If he had convincing evidence, he would present the convincing evidence. He wouldn't just complain that people won't accept his evidence because of bias. Present the evidence and we'll see. But they can't do that because they have no evidence to begin with. This is just a way around admitting that they've got nothing of substance at all because, as I already said, they weren't convinced by evidence to begin with. They are expecting us to be just like they are, and when we're not, they have to come up with some kind of an excuse for their followers because they really only care about their followers. You know, the ones that pay them. They only care about pandering to the people already on their side. They can't admit that their evidence, with some pretty big air quotes there, isn't convincing to anyone who isn't willing to approach the question with faith. So they just impugn our motives, lie about us, tell us we're not serious, but we are. It's not their fault that they have no good evidence, at least according to them. It's ours for expecting them to have some in the first place. Once you realize just how bad this is, just how their script is written, because it's all a script, just listen to these people, it's very easy to play along, and Brian is doing exactly what I expected him to do. Because these people never, ever change.
Because that would be an admission that this isn't about reason or evidence for them, but rather their own preferences and prejudices.
While ignoring your own. They can only look outward, never inward. They just have to be right no matter what, because it's emotionally comforting to do so. They just want to be right, but that doesn't mean they are. Therefore, the problem has to be on the other side. They can't intellectually evaluate their own positions because they never came to them intellectually in the first place. It was all emotions, and because these people are overly emotional children, they lack the rational capacity to take a few giant steps backward and deal with the reality as it actually is, instead of how they wish it was, because this is all about wishes and dreams after all. This is the problem, but it's a problem completely on their side. Just saying, well, I've got stuff that sounds good to me, that isn't good enough. It has to sound good to everyone. It has to be independently testable, and nothing the religious claim to have is. That's why they rely on philosophical arguments and faith claims and testimony and crap like that, all of which is absolutely useless for establishing the existence of anything in the real world. It's more, it sounds good to me garbage, and nobody outside of their cult cares. That's why they have to come up with bald rationalizations and excuses for why the problem isn't them, it's us. Except the problem actually is them. It's demonstrably them. They just don't care.
But when pressed on this question, I've seen some leading atheists like Richard Dawkins and Peter Atkins come to mind, admit that there isn't any possible evidence that would persuade them.
That's not exactly what they say, and even if it was, so what? They are individuals. Their views do not impact atheism or atheists everywhere in any way, shape, or form. Now, they might not know what evidence would persuade them. I think that's fair. I don't know what would have to happen for me to be convinced that any specific God was real. It would probably have to be something very personal and independently testable, but I couldn't put that into words, whatever that might be in the moment, and it wouldn't really matter if I could because the religious don't have any of that to begin with. And that's the real problem right there. It doesn't matter what we say, it matters what they actually have to present. It's ridiculous for them to ask us what would convince us since they don't actually have the evidence that we could say would convince us in the first place. It only matters what they can actually present. Go ahead and present it, and we'll tell you if we're convinced. If we're not, then it wasn't good enough for us, was it? Whatever. Because the real question here, and this is something the religious refuse to acknowledge, but it isn't about converting others to their faith. It's finding the actual truth in their beliefs, if any exists. They just want to make more Christians. We just want to find the truth. We don't care about becoming Christians if Christianity cannot be shown to be absolutely true. And that's true of all religions, not just Christianity. They don't really care why they convert people to their delusion. They just want to do it, true or not. And this is a fundamental difference in outlook. Ours is rational. We're only after the truth. Theirs is not. They're only after new converts. And that's kind of a problem, isn't it?
For example, if they were to witness like a miracle, some event that is impossible without supernatural intervention, which is the only kind of evidence that could exceed reasonable doubt, they would rather conclude that they were hallucinating or had gone insane than admit that something supernatural had actually occurred.
Because that's the problem with your assertion. It simply isn't demonstrable, and it's the demonstration that matters. If we saw a so-called miracle, how can we know it is supernatural in origin and not just some natural process that we're unaware of yet? The religious are just jumping to an emotionally comforting conclusion that they have not justified in any way, shape, or form. You don't just get to say, God done it. You have to prove God is real and that God is actually responsible for whatever you're trying to point to in a way that we can independently test and verify on our own. Keep your faith and your fifis out of it. We don't care about, well, it seems to me. You have to be able to prove that your God is real in some direct and demonstrable way where we can go out and study this God thing of yours independently of your wishes and dreams and see what's actually going on. And if you can't do that, then we shouldn't accept your empty claims because that's all they are. Empty claims. Anyway, we're just going to stop here for the week and pick it up again next time. Are you impressed with any of this, or is this just another theist shucking and jiving for his paying audience, not caring about anyone's perspective if they differ from his own? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Honestly, these people are so blinded by their own wishful thinking that they can't understand all the places they're going wrong. And they don't care. They're just after comfort and cash and control. It makes them feel good, so it's just gotta be true. But that's not how truth works. They cannot have an intelligent discussion on the subject because they're blinded by their own irrational faith. That's why they have to make up stories about why everybody else isn't just like they are. Because they're stupid and we don't want to be stupid. We're better than that. You ought to be better than that too. How about the religious give it a try?